Crazy maniac.
Stop asking if Silvio knew Tony killed Christopher. That question sounds smart, but it completely misses how this world actually works. Because in the mob, knowing isn't about facts. It's not a police report. It's not proof. It's about reading the weather, feeling when the air in the room shifts just enough that asking the wrong question could get you killed. And Silvio Dante lives exactly in that space, between certainty and survival. His job isn't to uncover the truth. It's to know how much truth is safe to carry, and when pretending not to know is the smartest move in the room. People obsess over his body language, the hospital scenes, the way Tony talks too much, the guilt that arrives before Tony does. And yeah, Silvio absolutely knew something was off. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. By the time Christopher died, the question wasn't who did it. The question was whether his death solved a problem no one wanted to keep fixing. And once you understand that, Silvio's silence stops looking like ignorance and starts looking like intelligence. What people keep circling around with the question of whether Silvio knew about Christopher's death is a fundamental misunderstanding of how intelligence actually works in that world. Knowing, in the mob sense, is rarely about possessing a neat packet of facts that can be recited like a police report. It's about reading the weather. It's about sensing pressure changes. It's about understanding when the air in the room shifts just enough that you'd better not ask the wrong question unless you want to choke on the answer. And Silvio Dante, more than anyone else in that crew, lives in that space between certainty and survival. Silvio is not some clairvoyant truth seeker. He's a professional, a consigliere, a man whose entire job description boils down to understanding exactly how much he should know and, more importantly, how much he should pretend not to. People point to his body language in the hospital, the way he watches Tony when Christopher's name comes up, the slight stiffness when Tony launches into his posthumous character assassination about branches through car seats. And yes, if you've spent a lifetime watching liars lie, Tony Soprano is not exactly Laurence Olivier. His guilt always arrives ahead of him like a bad smell. Silvio almost certainly clocked that something was off, but there's a wide gulf between sensing that Tony's story doesn't quite sit right and concluding, ah yes, my boss murdered his surrogate son with his bare hands on the side of the road. Silvio knows what a setup looks like. He also knows what an accident looks like. And he knows what plausible deniability feels like in the gut. Christopher's death, inconvenient as it may be, arrives wrapped in the perfect alibi, a catastrophic car crash that nearly kills Tony himself. This is not how hits are done when they are meant to send messages or remove political obstacles. Silvio has seen men vanish. He's seen robberies gone wrong and overdoses that arrive with suspicious timing and cleaner narratives than this mess. A mangled SUV and a near-dead boss don't scream premeditated execution. They scream tragedy with benefits. That matters. But here's the sharper truth that people dance around. By the time Christopher dies, very few people actually care. Not in the way that matters. The romantic idea that Christopher was still beloved at the end of his life collapses under even mild scrutiny. He was tolerated. He was endured. He was managed like a chronic problem everyone hoped would resolve itself without requiring paperwork. Some of the crew disliked him openly. Others were exhausted by him. A few felt flashes of guilt once he was safely dead and incapable of responding. That's not affection. That's emotional recycling. Take Paulie. His grief reads big, loud, and theatrical, which should immediately raise suspicion. Paulie is a master of emotional revisionism. Once someone is dead, he gains complete editorial control over the relationship. Suddenly, Christopher was like a nephew. Suddenly, Paulie regrets every harsh word, every joke at Christopher's expense, especially that last one that got a laugh from the room. This is not growth, it's self-soothing. People love the dead because the dead can't contradict them. Paulie's sorrow says far more about Paulie than it does about Christopher. It's grief as performance, guilt as nostalgia. Silvio, by contrast, does not perform grief. When he chokes up and mutters, "He's gone now, our Chrissy," it lands precisely because it's restrained. Silvio doesn't need the room to see him suffering. He allows just enough emotion to escape to signal humanity, then shuts the door. That's discipline, not depth, and it's why people mistake him for being nice. There's a persistent fantasy that Silvio was Christopher's last real friend, the lone adult in the room who respected his sobriety and defended his potential. There's some truth buried in there, but it's not sentimental. Silvio doesn't mock Christopher's attempts to get clean because a sober Christopher is a better investment. A sober Christopher is predictable. A sober Christopher can be trusted with responsibility, maybe even leadership, if he stops behaving like an entitled adolescent with a gun. When Silvio pushes back against Christopher's promotion, it's not jealousy or resentment, it's quality control. Silvio isn't anti-nepotism on principle. That would be absurd in an organization literally built on bloodlines. His issue is competence. Nepotism works when the heir can carry the weight. Christopher repeatedly demonstrates that he can't. People love to point out the moments where Silvio seems quietly supportive. The concerned look when Christopher talks about the stolen power tools, the lack of laughter when Paulie turns Christopher into a punchline, the way Silvio doesn't enjoy Tony's casual humiliations. These aren't gestures of friendship. They're indicators of professionalism. Silvio understands that publicly undermining a captain, even an acting one, is corrosive. He also understands that Tony's indulgence of Christopher's worst instincts is actively damaging the organization. Watching Tony sabotage a valuable asset through ego and favoritism frustrates Silvio not because he loves Christopher, but because he loves order. This is why Silvio is the most dangerous man in the room, and also the least flashy. He doesn't have beefs because he doesn't let things get personal. When violence enters his orbit, it's procedural. Tracy's death doesn't provoke Silvio because he's uniquely moral. It provokes him because Ralph violated a rule that Silvio considers foundational. Don't bring heat onto the business through pointless cruelty. Fat Dom's mouth gets him killed because he refuses to read the room. Silvio doesn't start conflicts. He finishes them when they threaten stability. That's not restraint. That's efficiency. And yet, for all his discipline, Silvio is not a hero. The episode that exposes this most cleanly is the one people tend to forget when they're busy crowning him the best of them. When he brutalizes Tracy, the mask slips. The same man who speaks of decorum and tradition is perfectly capable of extreme cruelty when it serves his interests. His civility is not morality, it's strategy. He weaponizes goodwill the way others weaponize fear. This is why the idea that Silvio would confront Tony over Christopher's death is laughable. Even if Tony sat him down and confessed outright, which he never would, Silvio's reaction would not be moral outrage. It would be calculation. He'd be less disturbed by the act itself than by the breach of protocol. Killing a made guy, especially one groomed for leadership, is not a small thing. Killing the family's highest earner over a horse nearly tore the organization apart. Killing the boss's surrogate son would do the same. Silvio understands that precedent matters more than intent. If Tony can justify killing Christopher, then everyone beneath him becomes expendable. That kind of instability is intolerable. Which brings us to the Ralph situation, because it's the clearest illustration of the difference between Silvio and Christopher. When Ralph disappears, Silvio's reaction is telling. He shuts down speculation immediately. Not because he's certain of Tony's innocence, but because speculation itself is dangerous. He understands that even entertaining the possibility that Tony killed a made man over personal grievances could fracture the family. This is also why Tony turns to Christopher for the cleanup instead of Silvio. Christopher's loyalty is personal, emotional, almost childlike. He's indebted. He's eager to prove himself. Silvio's loyalty is institutional. He serves the boss, but only insofar as the boss serves the structure. That distinction is everything. Tony needs someone who will help him bury the body and sleep at night. Silvio would help him bury the body and then quietly assess whether Tony had become a liability. Christopher, desperate for approval, doesn't ask those questions. He just grabs the shovel. This is also why Silvio never truly had an arc in the narrative. He doesn't change because he doesn't need to. He is what the system produces when it works as intended. Advisors don't get redemption stories. They get longevity. Silvio's brief stint as acting boss is enough to nearly kill him, not because he lacks competence, but because leadership exposes him to the emotional chaos he spent his life insulating himself from. The asthma attack isn't a joke, it's a metaphor. Power suffocates him because power requires emotional investment, and Silvio survives by keeping emotion on a leash. Christopher, by contrast, drowns in emotion. His addiction, his insecurity, his grandiosity, they all make him unstable. Even when he shows flashes of competence, he sabotages himself through recklessness, shooting a guy in the foot in a bakery, calling in bomb scares, making idiotic comments about putting wings in people's hair. These aren't harmless quirks, they're warning signs. Silvio sees them all. Tony ignores them because Tony needs Christopher to be something he simply isn't. Which is why Christopher's death feels both shocking and inevitable. The crew had already mourned him in pieces. The intervention, the relapses, the endless second chances. By the time the car flips, Christopher has become a problem everyone is tired of solving. When he dies, the grief that follows is less about loss than about relief complicated by guilt. So did Silvio know? He knew enough. He knew that Tony was acting strangely. He knew that the story Tony told himself mattered more than the story he told others. He knew that asking questions would only invite answers that couldn't be unlearned. And he knew that, in the end, Christopher's removal simplified things. Silvio's genius lies in his refusal to romanticize any of this. He doesn't pretend Christopher was a misunderstood prodigy. He doesn't pretend Tony is a tragic hero. He understands that this world eats its young and rewards those who learn how not to choke while chewing. Christopher never learned that lesson. Silvio mastered it so thoroughly that people mistake his survival for virtue. And that, ultimately, is the point. Silvio isn't better than the others because he's kinder or wiser in some moral sense. He's better because he understands the rules and never confuses them with feelings. He mourns just enough. He knows just enough. And he lives long enough to watch everyone else destroy themselves while insisting they had no choice. If this changed the way you see The Sopranos, subscribe. We don't do surface-level takes here.